Hello, Abigail here with the astrology of this week. This week has a lot going on. And I know you're like, Abigail, there's always a lot going on. But yes, we do have some pretty spicy stuff happening. Just a reminder, part of it is where Venus is currently transiting. It has gone through its square with the nodes and is now heading into its interaction in Cancer with everything that is in Aries. So those are the things that we're approaching this week. We also have Chiron stationing retrograde. Chiron is an asteroid, not a planet. It encompasses the themes of healing and not healing, trauma, repeated patterns and cycles. This idea that sometimes the more we heal, the more we hurt, things like that. And when it stations retrograde, there is this undercurrent of processing and kind of facing things, and it's already stationed. So we're already feeling the impacts of this retrograde. So that'll be for a minute. It is in Aries. It'll be continuing on the themes of self actualization, individuation. To be clear, not individualism, but individuation as a soul from systems of harm and things like that, to understand kind of like where you start and, the harm begins. I will preface that with there are some situations where you're never going to know what part of you is traumatized and what part of you is not, but kind of working through the bigger starts and stops of that integration can be really helpful. And that's something that I believe is going to come up through this transit. It'll be continuing through the fall. So just be ready to reprocess some stuff, to recognize something that I've seen as a theme here is to recognize the places where you are projecting your own emotional structure and your own ethics or beliefs on other people when it comes to trauma. Remember, not everyone processes things the way you do, or maybe shows up the way you do. And so, if you're interpreting people's behavior through the lens of your own pain, the translation may not be the same. So that's coming up on that day. And on the same day that that station's retrograde, we get Venus going into Cancer. Now, Venus loves being in Cancer. It's a really nice place for Venus. This is the lead up to the Venus-Jupiter conjunction in a few weeks. So we're headed towards another really beautiful, benefic Jupiter moment. So hang on to that as we go through the intensities and nuances of some tricky astrology, because as we know, Saturn and Neptune are at the early degrees of Aries. So this is going to be putting Venus in a square in a couple of days. And the minute Venus enters Cancer, that square is already activated. And so this tension between beginnings and endings and restrictions around relationships and how we integrate into kind of cohabitation and co-regulation. And then this very kind of individualized Saturn Neptune moment over in Aries, where it's like, yeah, but you still have to maintain yourself within this structure. You can't just disappear into the Cancerian waters, never to be seen again. I'll continue on to that because it happens officially on Friday. So let's make sure we hit one of the highlights of the week before we go into the full explanation of the Venus square, Saturn, and Neptune. Thursday, we have the Mercury Cazimi, and a Cazimi is the heart of something. So the Cazimi is the heart of the sun in astrology. And so when a planet is conjunct the sun, it's in Cazimi. And the most frequent Cazimi is the Mercury Cazimi, because pretty much every retrograde you have Mercury pass the sun a couple times. So we get a couple direct Cazimis and then one retrograde Cazimi. And so I find that this Cazimi framework, especially in the retrograde, definitely comes with the point at which I find the retrograde starts to make sense if it hasn't already. It's a point of illumination, maybe just a little happy circumstance that lightens the retrograde mood. It can be as simple as like meeting someone, a stranger out in public, and having a nice conversation, or it can be as big as like getting a big download and understanding something really important, or taking a step on intuition kind of in the moment that helps shift the trajectory of your retrograde story. So this is happening in Leo, so it's especially potent because we have the sun, which is the ruler of Leo. Also, you can look at my Mercury retrograde in Leo video, but the Mercury Cazimi, this Mercury Cazimi is a part of a series And the retrograde is a part of a series because we had last year's Mercury retrograde with a Mercury retrograde cazimi in it. It would behoove you to go do a little research, see what's happening around that time. That retrograde was a little later, so that happened mid-August. Um, but then the year before that, we had the Venus retrograde in Leo, which also had a Venus Sun conjunction. So go down memory lane and see what you're noticing as a pattern moving through these times. I think it'll help give you some clarity, especially on the Mercury cazimi. Might do that on the 31st of July. But yeah, it's a time of insight. I find it can be a kind of turning of the tides. If you feel a bit overwhelmed, you start to get your feet under you a little bit. Not everything will be revealed, but you will get some nice insights. Also, if you need to plan a difficult conversation that you're not feeling great about having to have in a Mercury retrograde, Mercury cazimi days are pretty good for that. They at least, especially if this is an argument or something you want someone to agree with you on, they at least kind of clear the room for confusion. So you're going to get more insight. Just make sure that you do it while the cazimi is still within a degree of the sun, because once we get out of that, then we're under the sun's rays and it's even more more chaotic. And then on Friday, that Venus square to Saturn and that Venus square to Neptune. So Venus squares to Saturn are very much about longevity, the ability to kind of stick to something. But remember, this Saturn is a new Saturn, so this could very easily be the beginning or ending of a commitment, or at least the iteration that you are in currently. However, Neptune is conjunct, so we may or may not be able to see where the boundaries are around this commitment or around the beginning or ending. But just whenever I see a square, I just encourage you to go with the flow, to sit in the energy, to watch and observe. The universe is going to shove you in a direction anyways. And I find it's better to let the direction get shoved rather than to push back on it. Although maybe pushing back is a part of your story. So do what feels right for you. But yeah, and then Venus square Neptune, we kind of get slapped in the face with reality a little bit, but maybe not reality as we wish to understand it or reality as it is, but reality as Neptune is portraying it in that part of our chart. Also, however, with Saturn it's a weird dichotomy because we have more clarity with Saturn, but then Neptune's taking the edge off, which I think can actually create a nice balance. They are both retrograde. But I do think it would behoove all of us to kind of sit with our relationships and our dynamics and to ask ourselves, what is my role in this relationship or dynamic? And I encourage you to expand it not just into romantic relationships, but into familial relationships, friendship connections. What is your role and your place in these connections, in these situations? And how much, especially with Venus in Cancer, how much are you maybe doing to mitigate tension instead of letting the relationship grow organically? Obviously, we want to care for stuff. If you're a really blunt person, maybe maybe it's not the best practice to say absolutely everything you think all the time. I have a habit of habit of going from extremes to either extreme honesty or being extremely gentle with people's feelings to a fault. But in this moment, it's about really sitting with and asking yourself what your role is and also what your limitations within the role are. Like, is the behavior you're engaging in, is the relationship dynamic you're engaging in sustainable long term? And if you were doing too much to maintain this relationship, I'm not talking about basic care. I'm talking about, coming in and maybe giving up too much or making things easier for someone else or not being 100% truthful, which is totally fine. We can't be 100% honest about every single thing we feel all the time. But if you can't be yourself and be a human within the relationship, then what needs to change? And that's the kind of winding out story that I think you're going to get more clarity on what you need to do when Venus gets into the early degrees of Leo in a bit and hits the degree of the new moon that's happening during Leo season. So know that this is kind of an unfolding story and it's a little spicy. And then we have our, very delicious um, moment here. I think I wrote my notes wrong. Give me 1 second. Yeah, that can't be true. Me reading my notes and being like, there's no way that's happening. Um, anyways, so there isn't anything happening on Saturday like I thought. Anyways, so going back, this is very Mercury retrograde. Um, Going back to kind of wrapping up the Venus square stories, this is intentionally tension based. Doesn't mean you have to act unless you need to, but oftentimes the universe is going to force us into action. Also, a reminder that this is our, once this week is over, next week is our last full week in the Mercury retrograde. So we are absolutely at that halfway point in the story. So start gathering your notes, noticing where things are headed, what's been going on. And yeah, just kind of sit and soak in the energy of this week, acting when you need to act, taking a step back when you need to take a step back. Also, in Mercury retrogrades, I find very rarely is anything really as desperate as it seems. It's mostly an inconvenience. So if things start to feel a little panicky, take a little moment, breathe in, breathe out, and ask yourself if this is going to matter in 10 years. And if it's not, or even 3 years. And if it's not, doesn't mean it's not important, but it means that it's not as high pressured as we think. A lot of times in Mercury retrogrades, I see a lot of people running around with their jobs, being panicked about a project. Truthfully, with some exceptions, most jobs have a lot of manufactured anxiety. So remind yourself of that in this moment in the Mercury square. Because especially if we're looking kind of in the field of work and stuff, the Venus square, if you have a tricky boss, is going to be dicey, and it's also probably going to show you how much you can endure with this person. So, as I tell anyone who wants to switch a job, if you know you hate the job, start looking for a new one, even if it seems impossible, because that's how we open up the energy for new opportunities, is by the belief that something else is possible. And if you hate the job and you stay in it for too long, and you keep telling the universe that you hate the job will go away. So, do a little preparation, start looking, start asking yourself what you need. Mercury square Venus and square Neptune, especially if your job is really people focused, is going to bring up a lot of that stuff. So just put a little pin in that. Anyways, my loves, that is my reading for this week. The tarot scopes are all up and posted. So is the Mercury retrograde video. So is the Leo season video. The tarot scopes, if you don't know, are a roughly 10-minute tarot reading for each of the zodiac signs, and you can layer them based on your sun, moon, or rising. If you have a stellium, aka 3 or more planets in a sign, you can also check that out as well. Anyways, I hope you have a blessed week. Take some time to yourself, sit with your feelings. This is a big week for inner work and processing. So do what you need to do to create that space for yourself if you can. And I will see you later. Blessed Leo season.